Good morning, ladies and gents. This is Mr. C, your social studies teacher, and today we're going to study a new topic, European exploration and expansion, specifically the motives and means for this. In the 14th century, conquest by the Ottoman Turks reduced the ability of Westerns to travel by land to the east. People then spoke about gaining access to the sea, to Asia by sea. Economic motives loom large in European expansion. Merchants, adventurers, and state officials had high hopes of expanding trade, especially for the spices of the East. The spices were needed to preserve and flavor food, were very expensive after Arab middlemen shipped them to Europe. Europeans also had hopes on finding precious metals. A new sailing technology made the voyages of discovery possible. Europeans had now reached a level of ship design that enabled them to make long-distance voyages beyond Europe. The Portuguese invented a ship called the caravel that was faster than previous models. It made long voyages and exploration possible and lowered the cost of transport. The caravel's design included a large cargo hold. It used a triangular or lateen sails taken from the Arab designs, which allowed it to sail against the wind. European explorers also had more accurate maps because of advances in cartography, the art and sciences of map making. Sailors used the astrolabe, an invention of Greek astronomers, to plot their latitude using the sun or stars. The magnetic compass, invented in China, also helped sailors chart a course across the ocean. Another factor assisting European explorers was their increasing knowledge of wind patterns of the Atlantic Ocean. The winds, ocean currents, and climate influenced the journey of the early sailing vessels that depended on them. The Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans have spiraling currents called gyres that result from global winds and other forces. The winds blowing south and west in North Atlantic, known as the trade winds, and the winds blowing from the west to the east, known as westerlies, were studied and utilized to the explorers' benefit. Beginning in 1420, under the sponsorship of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese fleets began probing southward along the western coast of Africa. There, they discovered a new source of gold. The southern coast of West Africa became known to Europeans as the Gold Coast. Portuguese sea captains heard report of a route to India around the southern tip of Africa. In 1488, Bartolomeu Diaz reached the tip, later called the Cape of Good Hope, and returned. Next, Vasco da Gama went around Africa and cut across the Indian Ocean to the coast of India. In May 1498, he arrived off the port of Calicut. This is the trip that Vasco da Gama did. Portuguese fleets returned to the area to take control of the Spice Trade from the Muslims. The Portuguese admiral, Alfonso de Albuquerque, established a port at Goa, India. Later, Albuquerque sailed into Malacca, a thriving spice trade port of the Malay Peninsula. By taking over Malacca, the Portuguese destroyed Arab control of the spice trade and gained a stopping place on the long journey to Moluccas, then known as the Spice Trades. This is an image of Malacca. A A Portuguese treaty signed with the local Moluccan ruler established Portuguese control of the spice trade. The Portuguese had a limited empire of trading posts on the coast of India and China. They did not have the resources to colonize these regions. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Spanish explorers. Let's start with Columbus. Christopher Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west instead of east around Africa. Columbus persuaded Queen Isabella of Spain to finance an exploratory expedition. In October 1498, he reached the Americas, where he explored the coastline of Cuba and the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean. Columbus believed he had reached Asia. After 3 voyages, he had still not found a route through the outer islands to what he believed was the Asian mainland. In his 4 voyages, Columbus reached all the major Caribbean islands and Honduras in Central America, all of which he called the Indies. Another important explorer funded by Spain was Ferdinand Magellan. In September 1519, he set sail from Spain in search of a sea passage through the Americas. In October 1520, Magellan passed through a waterway along the tip of South America, later called the Strait of Magellan, into the Pacific Ocean. The fleet reached the Philippines, but indigenous people there killed Magellan. Although only one of the Magellan's ships returned to Spain, as the leader of the expedition, he is remembered as the first person to sail completely around the globe. New lands to explore. Spain and Portugal each feared that the other would claim some of its newly discovered territories. They resolved their concerns over control of the Americas with the Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494. The treaty called for a boundary line extending from north to south through the Atlantic Ocean and the easternmost part of the South American continent. Unexplored territories east of the line will be controlled by Portugal, and those west of the line by Spain. This treaty gave Portugal control over its route around Africa, and it gave Spain rights to almost all of the Americas. Also, it is important to mention Amerigo Vespucci, a Florentine who went on several voyages. His letters describing the lands he saw led to the use of the name America after Amerigo for the new lands. The Americas, known as conquistadors, were individuals whose firearms, organizational skills, and determination brought them extraordinary success. With their resources, the Spanish were able to establish an overseas empire that was quite different from the Portuguese trading posts. The conquest of the Aztecs. For a century, the Aztecs ruled much of central Mexico, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific coast. Most local officials accepted the authority of the Aztec king in the capital, Tenochtitlan, which was located at the site of modern-day Mexico City. In 1519, a Spanish force under the command of Hernán Cortés landed at Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico. Cortés marched to Tenochtitlan with a small numbers of troops, 550 soldiers and 16 horses, and 2 translators. As he went, he made alliances with city-states that had tired of the oppressive rule of the Aztecs. Particularly important was the alliance with Tlaxcala. In November, Cortés arrived at Tenochtitlan and was welcomed by the Aztec monarch Montezuma II. The Aztecs were astounded to see the unfamiliar sight of men on horseback with firearms, cannons, and steel swords. These weapons gave the Spaniards a great advantage in fighting the Aztecs. However, the Aztecs soon experienced new disasters. With no natural immunity to European diseases, many Aztecs fell sick and died, especially from smallpox, carried to the Americas by the Spaniards. Meanwhile, Cortes received fresh soldiers from his new allies in city-states such as Tlaxcala. After 4 months, the Aztecs surrendered. The forces of Cortes leveled pyramids, temples, and palaces and used the stones to build Spanish government buildings and churches. They filled in Aztec canals to make roads. The magnificent city of Tenochtitlan was no more. During the 30 years after the fall of the Aztec Empire, the Spanish expanded their control to all of Mexico. Conquest of the Incas. When the first Spanish expedition arrived in the central Andes of South America, they encountered a flourishing empire ruled by the Inca. In early 1531, Francisco Pizarro landed on the Pacific coast of South America with only a small band of about 180 men. Like Cortes, Pizarro brought steel weapons, gunpowder, and horses. The Inca had never before seen these things. The Spanish also brought smallpox. Like the Aztec, the Inca had no immunities to European diseases. Smallpox soon devastated entire villages. Even the Inca emperor was a victim. When the emperor died, both of his sons claimed the throne. This led to a civil war. Taking advantage of the situation, Pizarro captured Atahualpa, the new emperor. With their stones, arrows, and light spears, Inca warriors provided little challenge to Spanish technology. After executing Atahualpa, Pizarro, his soldiers, and their Inca allies sacked Cusco, the Inca capital. By 1535, Pizarro had established a new capital at Lima for a new colony of the Spanish Empire. European rivals. The Dutch formed the West India Company. Although it made some temporary inroads in Portuguese Brazil and the Caribbean, the company lacked the resources and power to maintain these gains. In the early 17th century, Dutch settlements were established on the North American continent and named New Netherland. The colony extended from the mouth of the present-day Hudson River as far north as present-day Albany, New York. This settlement and others never flourished because of the West India Company's commercial goals. Fur trading with its remote outposts did not encourage settlement. After 1660, the Dutch commercial empire in the Americas fell to its rivals, the English and the French. In 1664, the English seized the colony of New Netherland from the Dutch and renamed it New York. The Dutch West India Company soon went bankrupt.